Off.
Good job. On the camera.
Good morning, Thailand, and welcome to Good Morning, Thailand. My name is Jay, and joining me today is Tim Newton.
Hello, good morning, good morning.
Hello, Tim.
I've got an emergency here before we start. This is a big comment. A lot of people signed up already and live, including Bob, Paul, Aldwin, Daryl, and Jim and Bob. But Rusty has got a real problem. He says, anyone know where I can get a good takeout breakfast burrito in Pattaya?
Oh my God.
An emergency in Pattaya.
Breakfast is the most important meal of the day.
Yeah, sorry about interrupting.
If anyone can help Rusty, please help Rusty.
Big problem.
Now to a little more important news. Let's start today with the COVID update. Today in Thailand, there were 11,305 new COVID-related infections and 80 new COVID-related deaths. 595 cases were from Thai prisons. Over the past 24 hours, 6,557 COVID-19 patients were diagnosed, fully recovered, and were discharged from hospitals.
Okay, so sort of leveled out a little bit. The deaths have dropped down a bit. The number of total cases has sort of stabilised a bit.
Yes.
But it's worryingly still over 11,000.
Yeah, it's been around 5 days now that it's been above 11,000. We definitely need to get that down. And also there's a slight sudden spike in the Thai prisons currently. Normally it would be around 150, but today it's suddenly around 600. So I hope that doesn't spike up anymore. It's now time for something we call the Sandbox report.
The report card?
The Sandbox report card. And joining us today from an undisclosed location is none other than Bill Barnett. Good morning, Bill.
Hi, good morning, Jay. Good morning, Tim. Jay, I'm loving your shirts. Where are you getting those?
Thank you. I got good advice from my dad. That's where I'm getting the shirt.
It's got a bit of an Indonesian vibe, this one.
Yeah, slightly beachy.
Yeah, a little boutique.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tiki bar, Indonesian, Phuket island vibes. Bill, let's start off by talking about the Phuket Sandbox. So with an average of around 400 people arriving every day into Phuket, would the Sandbox be considered a success?
Yes, again, it's how do we determine a success? I think to date right now we've got about 8,719 arrivals on the Sandbox program. So as you said, just over 400 a day are arriving. If we look at the metric of how many cases or COVID cases have come out of that, you've got 18 confirmed cases from COVID travelers who have entered on the Sandbox program, and there have been 95 local cases in the month of July. So overall, I think you've got to gauge that in terms of a program, it is registering those positive cases. 18, again, this is a fairly small percentage. And again, 8,619 travelers to Phuket are a lot more than we had last month. So certainly on that, again, it's a success, but I think we have to more importantly look at who are the travelers, right?
Yeah, who are the Sandboxes and where are they from?
Yeah. I think the reality of the Sandbox has been that this has become a de facto way to avoid the ASQ or the quarantine process. So you're seeing a lot of travelers who maybe do business or part-time residents or full-time residences actually come through Phuket, do the Sandbox. They prefer the Sandbox to doing 14 days of quarantine. So the reality on the ground is it's not all tourism. What it is bringing a good amount of travelers, though, who again have houses in Phuket or have houses in other places of Thailand, are starting to come and travel again. If we look over at Samui, I guess, Samui right now, the Samui Plus program has certainly been muted in terms of generating tourism traffic. It's got about 17 arrivals as of yesterday. So it's not got a lot of progress in terms of actually tourists coming in. Right. Phuket, of course, is a much different case because Phuket has international airlift.
Okay, we'll talk about Samui in a minute. Tim, you had a question.
Yeah, I suppose one of the worrying things, just with only 18 people who have tested positive from the intake of people in the sandbox, the worrying thing for the officials is that these people have either tested positive at the airport or on day 3, despite having a test before they jumped on the plane from their original destination. So that is a concern, how these people can actually be coming in and somehow slipping through the cracks of the PCR tests.
Yeah.
I think as far as we understand it, those people who tested actually had negative tests before actually coming. So in their own country, they had a negative test. Then they came to Phuket and tested positive. So I think that's the largest thing that the health officials right now are looking at, that kind of gap between the testing process.
Bill, with Samui and the low startup, I mean, again, like Phuket, they had to start somewhere, and it's probably been a bit lower than they were hoping for. But how long can Bangkok Airways keep running 3 flights into Samui each day out of Bangkok with only 1 or 2 sandboxes on it?
I think what they're doing right now is they're flying from Bangkok to Samui, and that the Samui flight is continuing on to Phuket. So right now, as of Wednesday, you could fly from Phuket to Samui on a non-sealed route. So if you're a traveler, I think there have been about 70 sandbox travelers who have now moved on to Koh Samui. So you do see that flight going to 2 locations. So it's a hopping flight. So they're trying to keep one airplane busy between those routes.
Sure.
Oh, I see. Is the flying through Bangkok a major barrier to Samui Plus success, you think?
It's not perfect. So one of the if we want to call it a success round with the sandbox, coming direct flights. I mean, there's been a lot of issues right now with Thai Airways. Thai Airways has certain routes they're flying from Europe right now, and they canceled the Copenhagen flight. I know one traveler who can't get back home because he's stuck in Phuket because he can't fly through Bangkok to Denmark. So that's another issue with Thai Airways. So again, it's sporadic, but being able to fly direct certainly is a big plus. And we're seeing a lot more North American travelers come through the Singapore Airlines route through Singapore as well.
All right. Thank you for that update, Bill. We'll be back right after this break. Hello, you're watching Good Morning Thailand. I'm Jay, joined by Tim Newton and Bill Barnett. So Bill, before we went to the break, we were talking about airlines arriving into the Phuket sandbox. Now, I have a question for you. Yesterday, we had around 242 arriving tourists into Phuket yesterday. Not all of them were tourists. Travelers, correct.
On 3 flights.
On 3 flights, which makes it an average of about 80 people per flight. Now, these are big airlines that we're talking about using 777s, A350s. So my question is, how long can these big airlines sustain traveling to Phuket with only, a quarter of their airlines full?
I think you've got to, airlift is critical for travel and for tourism recovery. I think right now we have a large propensity towards Middle East carriers, Etihad, Qatar, Emirates as well. And again, these are national enterprises as well. So it's likely these flights will continue. There is also air cargo as well. transporting these flights. I think we're a lot more worried about the Thai carriers right now. You've seen AirAsia, you've seen the cessation of flights to Bangkok domestically. So that's a real issue. So we're really concerned about the well-being of Thai airline carriers right now, the aviation industry in Thailand. I think that's a lot more important right now. Singapore Airlines still extremely stable, the Middle East airlines as well. But certainly the question of Thai Airways and the Thai domestic routes, this is a critical issue going forwards, because when the pandemic does start to taper off, how are we going to get people back in the air without airplanes?
Well, yes, you're right with this airlift thing, because at the moment we're saying Phuket's open, Samui's open. There are a few restrictions, but the beaches look great, and we encourage people to come if they are able to come at the moment, but there's nowhere else to go. You're sort of stuck in your sandbox or in Samui Plus. I mean, of course, you can go to the other islands, but unless you're really wanting to do a bit of an island tour, there's not a lot more you can do at the moment.
And there are new...
We've had a large influx of Bangkokians coming down. If you go around Phuket right now, you'll see a lot of minivans and these type with Bangkok plates, in terms of that. So we're seeing a lot of those people who have come down and now are pretty much stuck here. So they're going to stay on, because Bangkok people have been throughout the pandemic for a long time. They simply want to go out and enjoy something else. So
anywhere.
I think these people will be staying out. We kind of have it's been kind of a, not an immigration interest, but we've seen a lot of new faces around the island over the past few weeks. But right now, it's very difficult for Bangkokians to come to Phuket without flights as well. That's another key issue. Japan is an island, but right now Phuket is an island, very much so, in terms of being locked off from a lot of other areas with airlift throughout Thailand.
Even if they do come to Phuket, Bill, now we have new restrictions. I mean, the malls are closing sooner. 7-Eleven, you can't visit a 7-Eleven after 10 p.m., is it? 11 p.m.
11 to 4, they're closed.
No alcohols allowed again in restaurants.
After 9 p.m.
After 9 p.m., but it feels like a soft curfew, doesn't it?
No, not true. Yeah. Is it a soft curfew? Bars are being closed right now, and then restaurants can serve alcohol up to 9 o'clock. So we are seeing that's a new rule which is coming to effect today. So that certainly is a change. It's not great words, but restaurants are able to serve alcohol. You can certainly go to a hotel or a restaurant and have a drink until 9 o'clock. But there's a winding down. There's a lot of concern. Again, this is not the pandemic is not a Phuket concern. It's a Thailand issue across the whole country. So I think life here is a little better than other places in Thailand, sadly, right now. So we are seeing people who want to come from Bangkok and stay here and kind of, spend the next few weeks or maybe the next few months, because there isn't really any knowing of what's going to happen next.
I think Jason's got a list of those restrictions to bring up. Bill, just on this list, we notice of some of the things that they are restricting, and other things that are open, like movie theatres are still staying open. But Bill, of major concern, they're saying no bird races and no chicken races. This is a major concern.
I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what bird racing is. I'm not sure if there's a translation issue on the official guidelines. Anybody who understands bird racing or is a bird racing expert might be a good co-host or a guest on the show the rest of this week.
Bill, you've been here for what, 20 years or so.
Racing.
Have you ever seen a chicken or bird race in Phuket?
Not yet.
Or in
happening?
Thailand. I think someone somewhere in Thailand is very upset with us.
What sort of birds are racing? What?
I guess cockerels can.
Well, I guess
fast,
red birds go faster. I don't know. It's a complete confusion on that one.
We released the birds and off they go. Oh, there they go. They're never coming back again. Yeah. I don't know about these birds. We'll have to find out more. As you said, Bill, it might be a bit of a lost in translation.
Possibly. All right, bringing it back to Phuket. Bill, I have another question for you. Despite the COVID-19 situation, I believe there's still been buying and selling of hotels. What news do you have of this, and how has the current situation affected selling and buying of these hotels? Who are the new owners? Who are investing currently in Phuket?
Over the past year, there's been a lot of things about cheap hotels, people buying hotels. We get, we're hospitality consultants. We get calls every week. I want to buy a cheap hotel. I want to buy a beachfront hotel at half price. We haven't seen a lot of transactions. But this week we have seen a transaction. We've seen the Outrigger Group from the U.S. buy 3 Manatai branded properties in Khao Lak, Koh Samui, and Phuket as well. So our expectation has always been the third and fourth quarter of this year for hotel owners in Phuket, as well as Thailand, is going to get a lot worse. Frankly speaking, there's fatigue, there's cash flow drag right now, and Thai hotel owners simply don't have cash flow going into these periods, while the banks are trying to assist. There's also an asset warehousing program, which has been released by the government, but it's been hitting, it's got huge take-up. I think there's over 900 applications for asset warehousing. So again, the cash crunch is going to come and people are going to be buying hotels, but mostly foreign parties. You've got some cashed up groups like Asset World, Sing Estate and people like this domestically, but we are going to see an influx of foreign investment.
I see. Tim, do you have a question?
Well, I've got a question here from Grammar Officer Krupke, who says, oh no, I really should pre-check these, honestly. There's a lot of comments. I'll try and collate them for you.
Sure.
Question, is there a limit of how much beer you can buy at a 7-Eleven so you can just take it back to your room? I don't think there is a limit. Is there a limit?
I don't think there is a limit.
To the chicken racing, I don't know how many beers you're allowed at the chicken races as well. So maybe we could kind of combine those two issues in terms of how much beer. I guess how much beer do they have? So
I think if you're visibly intoxicated, they can refuse to sell you, but I've never actually seen that in practice.
Yeah, I don't know if they'd be that keen to say, sorry, we're not going to sell you alcohol.
Yeah,
they won't go down well.
Right. I have a question, Bill. So I wanted to ask you, if you were a tourist right now, and if you actually, if you're paying attention to the news in Thailand now, it's not only the COVID-19 outbreak in parts of Bangkok and around Bangkok and in Thailand. It's not the migrant worker camp news that we learned about yesterday, a lot more from Friso and Greg, but also the protests that were going on over the weekend. I mean, if you're a tourist looking at some of the footage of people being hit by water cannons and rubber bullets, I mean, the optics are very bad. Would people want to travel to Thailand?
I think the optics, we're still seeing demand. We're still seeing certificates of entry applications rising as well. So you are seeing people want to travel. I mean, there's an issue in the UK right now, certainly with the US putting warnings on US travelers going because of the COVID cases outbreak. So I think it's a broad issue as well. For Europe right now, the tourism officials, the TAT was banking on Europe and the travelers coming to Thailand. But right now, I think there was an announcement last week saying that the EU is putting out a warning for Thailand. Certainly that information is also, the entire EU is not banning travel to Thailand. They're not saying that. It's going to be on a country by country basis, but there's been a lot of misunderstanding across the Europeans are saying, we see in the news is the EU not allowing travel to Thailand, everything else. It's like anything else. So the communication strategy of the pandemic in Thailand is not being handled well. It's been handled pretty piss poor, actually. So I think that's something that could be improved because people aren't getting direct information quickly enough on what's changing and policies changing and flip-flopping all the time. So that's probably the biggest thing is the information war out there right now and telling people up-to-date news on what the rules are.
Sure. Tim, you've got a question for Bill.
From Come On You Horns. Who comes up with these names? Question for Bill. When does he think zero restriction travel will be allowed to Thailand? No sandbox, simply visa exemption on arrival and off you go. Out with your crystal ball.
We go back and been talking to TAT. Yeah, well, the TAT had been expecting to revisit the sandbox and reduce it to 7 days in the middle of August. That was the last we'd heard. But given what's happened in Bangkok right now, all bets are off, frankly speaking. The only goalpost we have right now to look at is the mid-October promise by the Prime Minister to reopen the country. And that's something which still is in the minds of most Thais as well. And they're still looking at that date saying, how and how are we going to get to that date? I think the answer is we don't know. The answer is very clear.
All right. With that, we would like to thank Bill for joining us for today's episode and helping us with the Phuket Sandbox report card. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thanks, guys. Love the shirt, Jay.
Thank you.
See you at the chicken races.
See you at the chicken races, if we can find it. And with that, we'd like to take a short break. We will join you in a bit. It's time to join the conversation. Thaiger Talk is our forum where you can share your thoughts and comments about all the news stories, as well as just about anything happening in Thailand. Just scroll down under any Thaiger story, click on Thaiger Talk, register, and you're in. It's time to join Thailand's fastest growing forum. So jump in and be part of the Thaiger Talk conversation. Good morning, Thailand. You're joined here today by me, Jay, and Tim.
Got some questions.
You do have. Go ahead.
From our viewers, and thank you very much. Put the word question in front. Makes us find your questions much quicker. This one from FFSS. Do you think Thailand should stop the export of the vaccines made here so we can sort this mess out? Alluding to the locally produced AstraZeneca vaccine under license. Some of those vaccines are being exported to Taiwan and some other countries.
Okay.
And of course, he's saying, well, stop the export. But I think these are contracts. These are paid for contracts. I'm not sure if they're in a situation where they can just stop exporting them. But yeah, the whole vaccine supply seems to be just the big stumbling block at the moment.
Definitely.
They're making promises and they don't seem to be able to commit.
And I think that's what's frustrating the people in Thailand.
Sure. Gordon Duncan says a question. In the Bangkok Post, they have an article about all free spaces in unused schools throughout the country will be used for COVID-19 hospitals. Do you see this as a positive? Well, I would say that you'd have to ask the Bangkok Post whether that is in fact true. It sounds to me, unused schools, there probably aren't that many unused schools in the country. And at some stage, I suppose, some regions that are seeing a high rise in cases are needing to have the option of setting up field hospitals, and an unused school would be a perfectly good place to do that. So, well, I think it's a positive. I don't know, it's not really up to us to say whether that's a positive or a negative, but whether it's true or not, we'll have to investigate. But if it's in the Bangkok Post, it's in the Bangkok Post.
It's in the Bangkok Post. Right, let me just talk about a poll that we did.
Yes.
Over the weekend, and we asked our viewers, what is the most critical issue currently facing Thailand? Jason, if you could bring up that graphic. Around 5.4 thousand votes in, and we gave you 5 options to the question, what is the most critical issue currently facing Thailand? And the 5 options were changing the Thai constitution to be more democratic, the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, institutionalized corruption, long-term economic recovery plans, and encouraging tourists to come back to Thailand.
Well, I should say that there were only the ability to have 5 options on these YouTube polls. So
Yes.
I tried to sort of choose the 5 things that I thought were probably the main critical issues.
Sure.
Interesting, the result.
The results, majority of you voted, the 50%, the COVID-19 vaccine rollout being the most critical issue currently facing Thailand.
Yeah.
And coming in second was encouraging tourists to come back to Thailand with 15%. Now, I've taken 2 comments that mildly summarize everyone's opinions and feelings, and one was from Terry, who said Thai people should be put first, which means getting the COVID situation handled to get the economy back on track. And the second comment was from Nick, who said, how can the PM encourage tourists to come back to Thailand when he makes it almost impossible for them to come in the first place? Now,
Well, that's not really quite true. I mean, the Sandbox and Samui Plus, whilst not ideal, do at least allow people to come to Thailand, either to return for business reasons, family reasons, or even as tourists. So I'm not sure if he's making it, well, it's not the Prime Minister, it's the CSA, if they're making it more difficult. I mean, there's not many countries in the world that you can actually travel freely at the moment. Airlines, flights are expensive. So I don't think it's any more difficult than most other countries.
I agree with the vaccination and the getting the tourists back to Thailand. I mean, it is very important, but I think getting everyone vaccinated should be the priority. I mean, we need to find a way to get majority of the people vaccinated so that they can be safe, so that we can start lifting these restrictions, getting the number of COVID related deaths down, getting the number of infections down. It could be the start of what we really need. So we need to prioritize that.
Walter wrote in a question and he says, why people fully vaccines get virus positive after arriving Phuket Sandbox, I do not understand.
Well, you can get the vaccine and still contract COVID. The vaccine doesn't kill the virus, it's just a layer of protection.
Protection for you.
Exactly.
You can still be a carrier.
Yeah, so that you can better deal with the severe symptoms. Now, some people are asymptomatic, but some people get severe symptoms, so the vaccine just helps you deal with the symptoms.
Thank you, Doctor.
Unlicensed.
Interesting, though, I think what Walter has asked is the question that the officials are asking, how can they test negative before they jump on the aeroplane? And in, I think, 4 or 5 cases, people have arrived at the airport and tested positive. There are some false positives, but they'd be double checked, of course. But yeah, it is a bit of a concern. But we're talking about quite a small number of people compared to the 8 or so thousand that have arrived over the past 20 days. It's a very small number, but still an interesting concern.
Yes. And secondly, about encouraging tourists to come back to Thailand, the answer that came in second. Tim, what do you feel about the difficulty that people are finding in entering Thailand? A lot of people are not really concerned with the amount of paperwork, but the lack of information and the lack of help that they receive.
Well, once they're here.
Yes, or while making their way into Thailand.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the biggest problem is that the situation is very fluid at the moment. On a daily basis and sometimes on an hourly basis, there are some new restrictions, there's some new things happening, a hospital has a problem, there's some new cases announced. So the situation being so fluid, it's very difficult for the government to sort of just keep on top of it. And a lot of people are saying the Thai government have not handled this well. I don't know of any governments around the world that have really handled it well. There's a handful. You could say like Australia and New Zealand have handled it fairly well. But I mean, Australia, there's a lot of states now in full lockdown. Is that the best way to cope with it at this stage of the virus evolution? I'm not sure. So it's very difficult to say if there's any countries that have really handled this perfectly or very well. Taiwan's another one that seems to have handled it fairly well. Question from Raina. Question, is it possible to travel from Phuket to Bangkok after Sandbox? So you've done your 14 days here in Phuket, or in Samui for that matter. If you're in Phuket, can you fly to Bangkok? Well, from tomorrow, no. There's just not going to be any flights from Phuket into Bangkok because they're saying that airlines cannot fly from a dark red zone to anywhere else in the country. This is going to be a problem. I think you could rent a car and drive to Bangkok. Whether you'd want to at the moment, that's entirely up to you.
Unless you have a very good reason you wouldn't want to be travelling to Bangkok right now.
But I have to say, between Phuket and Bangkok, there's some really nice places to visit.
Yes.
Phang Nga, Krabi, you've got Suratani, Chumpon, you've got those islands just off Chumpon. I mean, there's some really pretty areas. What's that national park just north of Phuket?
In Phang Nga.
With the lakes and you stay on the camp on the lakes. Khao Sok?
I'm not sure. I've never been there.
Please tell us. I think it's Khao Sok. It's where you can sort of camp on the lake. Yeah. Looks beautiful. I've never been there.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you mentioned that, not the national park, sorry, but just before the national park. That's what I thought, that a lot of people would be traveling to Samui a lot more than Phuket, because after 7 days you'd have access to Koh Tao and Koh Phangan. So I thought Samui would be a lot more attractive, but surprisingly there's been very few travelers to Samui.
Yeah, and I think the problems having to travel through Bangkok and the lack of flights and the lack of direct flights. But it's early days. It's 5 days now for the Samui Plus, and they'd be hoping for some more people. Like yesterday, 2 people arrived. It's hardly a roaring success.
It's so sad.
It is a bit, but these were early days, and we'll be able to look back in.
I hope that, I hope more people travel to Samui, because it's a gorgeous place.
Here's a question from Larry. He says, how's Stephanie? We need an update. What will she do now since she cannot travel?
Is she still in quarantine?
I think Stephanie's still in quarantine. If Stephanie's watching, send me a message on Facebook and we'll pass on your information. Otherwise, we will catch up, Larry, with Stephanie and try and get you a report today.
Sure. Wow, we've got any more questions, Tim?
Okay. Question, 20,000 to 30,000 cases a day, judging from the lack of testing in other provinces other than Greater Bangkok, that seems highly likely. Well, we're not up to 20 to 30,000 cases a day. They're talking about 10 to 11,000.